Hi, today we're going to look at the relationship between aperture, shutter speed and ISO. Aperture, or the f-stop, determines your depth of field. Shutter speed is the speed in which your camera freezes motion, and the ISO is how sensitive your camera is to light. So let's take a look at some practical examples.
Back in the day, film was the sensor. It was also the white balance. We're not covering white balance today, but it was basically tungsten and daylight, inside and outside. The film came with an inherent ISO, typically between 64 ISO and 400 ISO. The film sat in the camera where the sensor sits in a modern DSLR, just there. As with a modern DSLR, the increase in the ISO increases noise in the picture. We've got a couple of examples. This is 100 ISO, and this is 12,800 ISO. You can see there is a lot less grain and noise at 100 compared to 12,800 ISO. Most cameras can handle quite a high ISO. This is an extreme example.
The shutter speed is the length of time your camera sensor is exposed to light. So when you look through the viewfinder, the shutter curtain sits in front of your camera sensor, blocking the light. So when you take a picture, the shutter moves away from the camera sensor, allowing light to hit your camera sensor. To give you an idea, I'm going to walk across set while Remy takes some photographs of me at a variety of different shutter speeds. I'm going to put on a sparkly coat so it leaves a more distinct light trail during the longer shutter speeds. Now let's take a look at the shots. This is 1/4 of a second, a long shutter speed. So anything that moves during a long exposure will be blurred. At 1/30th of a second, it's starting to get sharper, but it's still not there yet. It's only once it reaches 1/500th of a second does the motion become frozen. To keep the exposure consistent, we've upped the ISO, so our exposure value remains the same.
That was a very graphic illustration of how the shutter speed can affect even a slow-moving subject. Now we're going to have a look at how the aperture, which is in the lens, affects an image. Looking through the back of the camera, you can see the aperture, starting at f2.8 and stopping down in increments to f32. Let's see how that affects the image. f2.8 gives us a shallow depth of field, so that only one of the cameras is in focus. As our depth of field increases, more of the cameras become sharp. f11 is the most common optimum aperture for a lens. As we stop down, increasing our depth of field, we have to lengthen our shutter speed to maintain the correct exposure. f2.8, large aperture, shallow depth of field. f32, small aperture, large depth of field. We've covered ISO,
Shutter speed,
and aperture.
3 very important settings on your camera.
This will enable you to come off of automatic, shutter priority and aperture priority, giving you creative control with your photography.
Cheers!
Bye!